Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 620, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Today, joined by co-host Will Porter. Will, how you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, man. It's super hot out. I'm sweltering in 300-degree heat, but doing all right, man. How you been?
Doing well, Will, and yeah, everybody, we're going to suffer through the heat today to bring you some good, high-quality audio without the AC hum in the background, so it may be a little hot, but we got a lot of really important and interesting stories to talk about in today's show, Will. A
Yep.
lot of them written by myself or you, and most of them published at antiwar.com, which is where we repost the blog. We repost this show on that blog. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. If you like the show, be sure to share it out. If you're a new listener, be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. We're always updating news stories on this, so you're definitely going to get the most if you're a subscribed listener to the show. And then follow us on Twitter. The show is at con_interest. He is at the Will Porter, and I'm at Kyle Anzalone_. Will, let's get into it. First story up here today. You wrote for antiwar.com on June 14th, and I think this is a really interesting story just because for years, Will, we heard everybody has to get vaccinated or there's going to be more mutations of the virus and it's going to get more deadly and it's going to kill more people. And all we need is for every person on earth to be vaccinated, and then the virus will hit a dead end and we could eradicate it. And Will, this is the goal of all of humanity, so everybody has to get vaccinated. But wait, the Pentagon ran a secret campaign to smear China's COVID vaccine? Say it ain't so, Will.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the funny irony of the Biden administration is one of the most, pro-vaccine administrations I've ever seen, urging you to inject it into your aorta or whatever. But now, meanwhile, the Pentagon is running like a secret smear job, trying to undermine confidence in vaccines. So it's kind of an interesting thing there. But I guess this whole story, I guess it's not entirely shocking given the other fear mongering and smears that the U.S. government has used against China, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. But I do think this one goes maybe a bit further than what we have seen before with this kind of thing. So as you just kind of outlined there, the U.S. military did carry out a massive clandestine disinformation campaign against China's main coronavirus vaccine, which people might recall was named Sinovac. This is all covered in a story by Reuters last week. They did a big investigation. They based it on interviews with U.S. military officials, other foreign officials, and they basically found the Pentagon worked to discredit the Chinese vaccine in countries all over the developing world between 2021 and 2022. So kind of at the height of the pandemic and the fear and the hysteria and all that. And they largely did this through social media using like these swarms of hundreds of fake, like not bots, but just fake accounts, I believe, to try to influence public opinion in these various countries. So, for example, they targeted Muslim audiences in the Middle East and in Central Asia and in the Philippines, all places with pretty substantial Muslim populations. And they did that by having these fake social media profiles post things about how Sinovac somehow incorporates pork gelatin as an ingredient, like clearly trying to convince people that this goes against Islam and that they should not take this or they shouldn't trust it, sort of undermine confidence in this vaccine. And of course, I'm no expert on immunizations or anything, but I did look into this a little bit. Apparently, there are all kinds of pharma companies that do use pork and cow-derived ingredients in their shots as like stabilizers. And here I'm talking about vaccines in general too, not only COVID. And actually, when it comes to the COVID vaccines, I wasn't able to find confirmation whether Sinovac or any other COVID vaccines actually included those pork ingredients. So it's not even entirely clear to me whether the Pentagon, like that could just be a complete lie. But it does seem that some officials from Muslim countries, they did raise this issue with China at various points during the pandemic. Like, hey, this could potentially be an issue for our people. But no official ingredients list has ever been put out by Sinovac. So it's not really clear whether the Pentagon was BSing there or not. But yeah, this is effectively the main thrust, though, is that they're spreading information online to try to, discredit and undermine the Chinese vaccine for whatever reason, like I guess just a PR campaign. This is far from the only time the Pentagon has done similar things like this, or also intelligence agencies, trying to discredit a so-called U.S. adversary. I know you actually covered a story a couple of years back. There was a Stanford study done with Graphica that found this huge network of fake social media profiles, like propagandizing against Russia and China and Iran and pushing pro-U.S. talking points. And interestingly, the Reuters investigation actually pointed out that some of the fake accounts doing that were also involved in the Sinovac smear. So suggesting this has all kind of been organized or at least involved by the Pentagon. So, that's a particularly interesting detail. But that's basically it for this. I think that's like the main details. I would encourage people to go read the actual Reuters write-up. There's like smaller little things in there that they might find interesting. It was called, quote, Pentagon ran secret anti-vax campaign to undermine China during pandemic. That's your keywords there. And I guess the last thing I'll point out here, the Chinese government, they have actually responded to this report earlier this week. On Tuesday, their embassy in the Philippines, which was one of the countries that was heavily targeted by this campaign, they say that this only proves that the U.S. is, quote, hypocrisy, malign intention, and double standards. So pretty standard statement from the Chinese. But that's, I think, all I had on this for the main stuff. I'll kick it over to you if you had anything else.
Yeah, no, the only thing I guess I think that's worth adding, Will, is just to show what the values of the empire are. Because, this is something that went on during the Trump and Biden administrations. And certainly, I'm sure there are some liberals who would believe that Trump would essentially weaponize the Muslim faith against the Muslim people in order to get them to not take a vaccine to smear China because, Trump hates China and Trump doesn't care about other people.
Right.
But then at the same time, the Biden administration does that as well. It just really goes to show again that the empire is all on board with this and all on board with war, essentially over all other values. Now, we'll have this other article here that's much from this week, June 19th, antiwar.com. U.S. tells Lebanon it will support Israeli attack on Hezbollah. And, well, this is a really interesting article. I guess as me and you and Connor Freeman and Jason Ditz are all filling in for Dave DeCamp this week, writing news stories, I expected a lot of stories to be centered around what was happening in Gaza, not necessarily Lebanon, but really this week, a lot of the top news stories about what's going on in the Middle East have been about what's happening in Lebanon. Tensions have really escalated between the two sides, even though for part of this past week, Lebanon wasn't even carrying out strikes in Israeli territory because they were observing a Muslim holiday. And yet Israel was carrying out larger and larger strikes in Lebanon. We had Amos Hochstein, President Biden's deputy assistant, running around the Middle East trying to negotiate a deal. And you have this article with, I think, some really interesting details about what the U.S. is trying to accomplish and the likelihood of war. So for people who have been listening all week, this is really just a conversation of what's going on. But Will, what are kind of the latest updates here?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I did write up this latest one. You have been doing a great job following this particular thread lately. These tensions between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah, and the attempts by the U.S. to kind of smooth things out to avoid another war over there. And so yeah, people might be aware, I think, that especially this audience, that Hezbollah and Israel have been bombing each other pretty much nonstop since the war in Gaza broke out last year. And that has slowly been escalating recently. The Israelis have been launching deeper airstrikes and assassinations in Lebanon. And Hezbollah has continued to fire rockets over the border into Israel, which has displaced like thousands of people in that border region. So with all this going on, the Biden administration has, I guess they're kind of worried about this. They sent presidential aid. You named him. I believe he's Amos Hochstein is how you say his name, I think. They dispatched him over there to go talk with Israeli and Lebanese officials and maybe try to hammer out some kind of truce, or at least, pave the way to one. But it's not really clear. It doesn't seem to be going too well, this effort to, kind of make friends between the Israelis and Lebanese, or Hezbollah at least. Because according to an Arab official who had spoke with Middle East Eye, during his trip to Beirut, Hochstein basically told Lebanon that the United States would support a future Israeli attack on Hezbollah. He didn't really specify how that would be done, but he signaled that Biden would get involved in that conflict on behalf of Israel if now, he also reportedly told them that the Israelis planned on ending their main combat mission in Gaza sometime in the next 5 weeks, which might come as a surprise to some people who have heard quotes about like indefinite fighting there. Although it might be because the Israelis are simply not able to achieve their objectives of eliminating Hamas or whatever. But apparently Hochstein says that the Israelis plan to wind this down sometime in the next month or so. And he suggested that the two sides, the Israelis and Hezbollah, should use this opportunity to negotiate. However, the chances for those talks look kind of slim at this point. Hochstein also had said Israel would shift its full military focus to Hezbollah once the Gaza war winds down. So it's not really clear where there'd be room for negotiations in that. If they're immediately going to shift to like a war footing with Hezbollah, where's there a time that they're going to sit down and talk? It's not entirely clear to me. And then on top of that, you also have the Israeli military saying that they've already approved an attack plan for Lebanon. I know you covered that recently. So it's pretty alarming. I guess there's still a chance to avoid the worst case scenario. Maybe this is a lot of just like big talk and bluster from officials threatening each other. But it does kind of look like we might be heading for some kind of like, additional war, a conflict on Israel's northern border. Before we're even out of the current war in Gaza, we're already looking at a possible conflict with Lebanon, apparently with some kind of direct U.S. involvement. So that is all a little bit, frightening, I guess. So that's basically all I had on that. I'll kick it over to you and let you add whatever you want.
Yeah. No, well, on this story, I really just wanted to add that I think this reflects overall the administration's extremely convoluted policy when it comes to dealing with Israel. We set red lines. Israel can't attack Rafa, or else we're going to cut off some weapons shipments. They attack Rafa, nothing happens. The administration has spent 8 months trying to arrange this blockbuster deal with Saudi Arabia to get them into the Abraham Accords, if only they will normalize relations with Saudi Arabia and pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. And this is like, somehow supposed to be this massive plan to unwind the war. And yet the Saudis are clearly stating that there has to be a two-state solution if we follow this path. And the Israelis, which were backing to the hilt, continue to say the one thing they'll never allow is a Palestinian state. And so, again, the whole policy is convoluted. And here you have Hochstein, who's, warning that we're really on the precipice of a war. And we have American officials talking to CBS News saying they're really concerned that this war is going to escalate. But Hochstein, is saying, well, that the fighting in Gaza is going to last another 5 weeks. And so if the fighting's going to go on for 5 weeks, it certainly seems that we're going to end up with that escalation that leads to a wider war in that time. It also seems here that maybe the White House has really run out of places to pressure Hamas into accepting a deal, because we had, again, this convoluted speech where Biden comes out and says to the American people, Israel proposed this very generous ceasefire to Hamas, and Israeli officials immediately come out and say, no, we didn't, and make it pretty clear that they had not signed on to that ceasefire proposal. And so to try to force Hamas into accepting a ceasefire proposal that the Israelis are openly saying that they're not going to abide by, they first tried to pressure Qatar and Egypt to get that to happen. And now it almost seems like they're leaning on Hezbollah, basically saying, look, if the fighting doesn't stop in Gaza, then Israel is going to attack southern Lebanon. And so, this, again, we just had this extremely convoluted policy that doesn't make any sense, where it seems like the Biden administration has really locked itself into escalation after escalation. All right, well, we'll move on here to talk about another article you wrote for antiwar.com. This one from June 19th. Houthis sink another ship in the Red Sea, and this time they killed a sailor. So what happened here?
Yeah, so this one will just kind of be brief, but I do think this is at least worth mentioning in the context of everything else going on right now, particularly what we just talked about. The Houthis, the Yemeni armed group, I'm not really sure if you call them rebels anymore, but maybe they are again. They have been launching a flurry of attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea over the last couple of months. They're doing this as a way to protest the war in Gaza. I'm sure the audience has heard, you've covered this many times. I think they've carried out like 60 of these attacks so far. Some where fighters actually like board the ships and capture the crew and all that. And then there's others where they just kind of like attack a ship with drones or missiles. So last week, the Houthis decided to target this Greek-owned cargo ship called the Tudor, which they apparently hit with some kind of air projectile, as well as with, at least according to the White House, an unmanned naval drone of some kind, or like an unmanned boat laden with explosives. And this connected, this hit the ship, and most of the crew had to be evacuated soon after that. But one guy is still missing, and he's believed to be dead now. I think they thought he was trapped in the engine room of the ship, and they have not been able to find this guy. I think he's a Philippine national, as I believe were other crew members on the ship. So this Greek ship, the Tudor, was basically left adrift, taking on water somewhere off Yemen's coast for several days. This was last week that the Houthis had bombed it. However, this week on Wednesday, it finally sank. It's been sitting there kind of taking on water for a while, and now it is, at the ocean floor, presumably. This is the second vessel that was actually downed by the Houthis. They've attacked a whole bunch of ships, but not actually sunk many of them. The only other one they sunk was a British-owned ship that they sank after an attack in March. And I don't think there was any deaths in that case. And the Houthis, they have said in previous cases too, they're attacking ships, they said, because they're either have some kind of links with Israel or Israeli businesses. However, in this case, they said that the Tudor was attacked because it violated their, I guess you call it a ban, their self-imposed ban on ships sailing to Israeli ports, because they consider all of Israel to be occupied Palestinian territory. So they think you're like, helping the occupier if you go do business with them. And Houthi military officials, like through their media wings, said that they had warned the ship to stay away from the port of Haifa, but apparently it went anyway, and they retaliated exactly as they said they would. They shot the thing. So basically, I think that is it for that sinking. This is just one among dozens of similar attacks in the Red Sea lately. But in addition to all these tensions over Gaza and Lebanon right now, like I don't think it's too paranoid to worry a little bit that there might be some kind of wider regional war in the making right now when you have all these related hostilities going on across such a huge area, with all these different actors, and it's very, a lot of complexity. So that is sort of, I think these tensions in the Red Sea kind of add to all that and this whole picture. So I'll let you add anything if you want to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add there. Well, I think you did a pretty comprehensive job covering it. Want to move on now and talk about that pier. This one, antiwar.com, June 20th. Pentagon to resume Gaza Aid Pier for now. And this is somewhat of a follow-up to a story that you had written earlier in the week, which was they had towed the Aid Pier back to port. So, Will, it seems like we're spending an awful lot of money to not get any aid into Gaza. What's happening here?
Yeah, so this whole temporary pier thing has just been kind of a disaster since it was rolled out last month. Like, I don't want to be too critical of like one of the few things actually getting some limited stuff to hungry people in Gaza. Like, there's something, it's very small amounts, but there's something. So I don't want to be too much of like a hater on that, but the pier has fallen so far short of what the US government had said it would do and what they hoped it would accomplish. I know you've covered some of these problems in the show. There've been all kinds of like logistics and security issues that have slowed down the operations or caused pauses or delays. There's been bad weather. You mentioned the thing had to be towed away to, I think it was Ashdod, Israel, this for the second time now. The first time they had bad weather, the thing was nearly destroyed, just like the choppy waves, nearly dismantled the thing. So they've had to relocate the thing twice now. And it's been sitting out there for since it first started operations, I believe on May 17th. It's been out there for 35 days, but it's only functioned for 10 of those days in total. And so that should give you some idea of how things are going with this, that it's not really working. The Pentagon had said they had eventually hoped to transfer 150 truckloads of aid into Gaza per day using the pier. But according to aid groups that spoke to the New York Times, so far the real figure has only been about 7 truckloads per day, which is less than 150 significantly. According to the United Nations, I think the pre-war levels are something like 500 truckloads. So even the 150 goal is kind of, maybe that's not for the whole Gaza Strip, maybe that's just for one part of it, but it's still fairly inadequate for millions of starving refugees, especially because there's all these crowded conditions and people are now concentrated into these areas of southern Gaza. And so even 150 truckloads would still be woefully inadequate to meet those needs.
And not to disrupt you too much here, Will, but I just want to say I've seen some pictures of the trucks that are carrying aid over the pier, and this is probably because if you look at the pier, it's not very wide. It's maybe as wide as a 2 or a 4, I guess a 4-lane American highway maybe. It doesn't look like more than 2 of these trucks could really pass at the same time, and there's no guardrails on the thing, right? And 3 soldiers have been injured while using this pier. So anyways, my overall point is the trucks don't look very full. You see some of these trucks crossing the Rafa border crossing, and they're packed up or overflowing with the goods they have in the back of them. And these look, I mean, I'm not even joking, a half, maybe third full. Again, it's probably logistical because it's the sea route, and this is there's a lot of waves and everything going on. I'm sure the road is very bumpy and very wavy and probably very hard to drive on. But just to point out, if they're saying 7 aid trucks are getting in per day, that's not, 7 trucks full of aid. That's just 7 trucks of some aid on them.
Right. I recently encountered this issue of trying to quantify what is a truckload of aid. It's a truckload is a measure of volume, it's just a box containing stuff. It's not, it doesn't, it's going to obviously differ by what's on there, if it's rice or flour or whatever. Because you just see all these numbers and figures fly around, and I try to make sense of them and compare apples to apples. But you have things measured in truckloads, in tons, in British tons, TONNES, and then things measured in pallets, and it just gets very confusing. It's hard to kind of keep track of what exactly is being sent there. But with all this stuff in mind about all these problems, logistical problems, security problems, the weather problems, we now have this report in the New York Times this week saying that this pier could actually be dismantled for good as early as next month, which is a lot sooner than the original end date set by the White House. That was supposed to be in September because there's yearly weather in Gaza that would just make the pier hard to use. There's rough seas and stuff that would, as we've already seen, the thing almost got destroyed by rough weather. So they had planned to remove it in September. But now, apparently, according to U.S. officials who spoke with the Times, it could be as early as July. Now, these U.S. officials didn't really give a reason why it would be shut down, but we can only guess it's because of just all the issues we've been talking about here. This is really just not working well. It's kind of become an embarrassment, I think, for the Biden administration compared to what they had sort of touted this thing as initially. And another thing is all kinds of aid groups have criticized this project. It's not just us, being haters on it or something. Many of them have pointed to the fact that land routes are far more efficient ways to get supplies into Gaza, rather than by bringing them by sea or dropping boxes on top of living people and killing them from the air, as the U.S. has done on at least one occasion. Not funny, just horrible. And the problem is, of course, Israel, because they control everything going in and out. Aid coming over the border crossing with Egypt, which apparently has now been completely destroyed by the IDF, as I think you covered in a recent story. I should say, too, we don't have any official confirmation that the pier will actually be shut down in July. But given what a headache and a cluster F this has been all along, it wouldn't be that surprising if it were removed there. So I think that's basically it here. This aid pier has kind of been a disaster, and it might have days or weeks.
Yeah, and the only thing I really want to add to your story here, Will, is what you highlight at the end, which is that the move could pressure Israel to open more land routes if this isn't open. Right. Remember, in March, when Biden announced this during his State of the Union address, this was really meant to relieve domestic American political pressure on President Biden, saying, hey, you either have to stop supplying Israel with weapons or they have to start letting this aid in. This was his solution to, I'm not going to do anything to Israel, and at the same time, I want more aid to get into Gaza, and obviously this has been a failure. Now, something that Dave DeCamp and myself have pointed out over the past few weeks about this aid pier is this was initially suggested by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and there was a report in Israeli media who say that this could be used to deport the Palestinians from Gaza to somewhere other than Egypt. So that's just important to keep in mind. Although if it's getting dismantled, at least it can't be used for anything nefarious. Now, Will, I got just a couple stories here I wanted to comment on before we wrap up. And one of them you already alluded to. This one from antiwar.com on June 20th. IDF, Rafa crossing completely destroyed, no longer usable. So the Israeli Defense Forces said Gaza's lone border crossing with Egypt has been completely destroyed by its operations in the area. In recent days, the IDF has targeted a few undestroyed areas left in the Gaza Strip. On Wednesday, the Israeli Army radio reported that the Rafa crossing was now unusable. It said, "This is how Rafa crossing looks today, completely destroyed and no longer usable after being taken over by Brigade 401 in one night." So I guess it means that this has essentially been the state of the building for the past month because the Israeli operations began in Rafa on May 7th, So the radio station continued. Due to its relative proximity to the border, the Israeli army used the crossing as a stopping point and resting area. The Gaza media ministry reported the destruction on Monday, stating occupation forces damaged Rafa crossing halls that were used by locals to exit the strip. Images reviewed by Middle East Eye reportedly showed the exterior of the structure was incinerated. Israel began its operations in Rafa on May 7th. Prior to that assault, the crossing served as a main lifeline for more than 1 million displaced Palestinians who were sheltering in the city. Over the past 6 weeks, aid shipments into the strip have plummeted by 2/3, triggering fears of a full-blown famine. Tel Aviv places blame for the increasing starvation on Palestinians. However, aid agencies point to the Israeli military operations throughout Gaza as creating unsafe and unstable conditions to making aid deliveries impossible. In recent days, the IDF has stepped up its operations in central and south Gaza. The bombing in southeastern Rafah and Deir al-Balah has destroyed some of the only areas in the Gaza Strip that have not seen intense fighting in the past 8 months. The Israeli military radio station explained the operations in Rafah are establishing lasting control over the Egypt-Gaza border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor. The radio station explained the Israeli military already started thinking about long-term control over the corridor. The assault on Rafah has led to the displacement of over 1 million people. Oxfam reports that many of the refugees have been driven into tent camps, serving as and severe deprivation and shortages of essential goods are plaguing them. In statements, the aid agency said, living conditions are so appalling in Al-Mawasi, there are just 121 bathrooms for over 500,000 people. Before Israel invaded Rafah, President Joe Biden claimed to have imposed a red line on Tel Aviv, insisting it must have a plan for civilians before attacking the city. Sally Albi-Khali, Oxfam's Middle East and North African director, said that the criteria has not been met. She said Israel claimed weeks ago it would provide full humanitarian support for media assistance to civilians it had told to move. Not only is this not happening, its ongoing impunity, bombardment, and deliberate obstruction have created unprecedented and impossibly dangerous conditions for humanitarian agencies to operate. Still, the White House refused to take any meaningful action against Tel Aviv and has continued most military aid in support of the Israeli onslaught. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs is under review, but stressed that everything else is moving as it would normally move. Will, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, this is just yet another case. There's just been hundreds and hundreds of cases of the Israelis bombing vital things that are needed for aid. Like, this corridor is one of the few remaining, doorways into Gaza to get stuff into there. And of course, now it's wrecked. Did you see any indication of what this could mean for repairs, or what it could mean for future, operations of this crossing? Like, did they suggest that it could be up and running anytime, or is it just done?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any plans to restore this border crossing at any time in the future, Will. I think part of the reason probably why is Israel wants full and absolute control over all of Gaza's borders. And while they did have effective control over the Egyptian border with Gaza due to the American leverage over Cairo, this, is a more extensive control than they had before. Some Palestinians were able to bribe their way across the border, and there was some smuggling and stuff like that going on. Now, I have one more story before we wrap up here today, Will. Netanyahu's aides warned him not to post video attacking U.S. So this has been one of the main threads that we've, covered on the show over the past week, is this video that Netanyahu published on Tuesday to his X account that slammed the White House for blocking military transfers to Israel. And for those of you who haven't heard me say it before, I really just love reading this quote and how Netanyahu said it, so I'm going to do it again. When Secretary Blinken was here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciate the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war, but I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable in the past few months the administration has been holding weapons and ammunition to Israel. The Biden administration's response has been a mix of shock and anger and confusion here. The White House suspended one Iran strategic dialogue summit between the U.S. and Israeli officials, but business between Washington and Tel Aviv remains largely unchanged. High-level meetings between Israel and U.S. officials are expected in coming days. Several U.S. officials said they are perplexed by Netanyahu's remarks because U.S. weapons are flowing to Israel at a normal pace. The White House press secretary told reporters, "We genuinely do not know what he is talking about," and I think for once that she is actually sincere in her ignorance. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the video was disappointing and vexing, adding it's hard to know what went through him. The video was puzzling to say the least. Maybe even more puzzling, Will. Netanyahu appears to have taken the White House's mild response as a personal attack. On Thursday, he posted to his X account, I am ready to suffer personal attacks provided that Israel receives from the U.S. the ammunition it needs in the war for its existence. Now, Will, we don't know exactly what Amos Hochstein said to Netanyahu on Tuesday when they had their meeting. A part of that meeting was about the situation in Lebanon, but he was supposed to have expressed the White House's frustration during that meeting. But I haven't seen anything, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong here, that actually is an attack on Netanyahu personally. I mean, they say they're confused by what he said, but well, if I said I'm confused by what you said, you wouldn't say, "Why are you insulting me?" You would maybe try to clarify or say, "Why are you being intentionally obtuse?" But this is really seems to be a nonsensical response to me.
He must be so used to like American officials just like kissing his feet and just giving him whatever he wants that even this mild like little bit of like, hey, we're not really sure what Netanyahu's talking about. He takes that like as such a he's like such a crybaby about it. I do find his quote hilarious too. He says it is inconceivable, maybe because it didn't happen. Like the U.S. cutting off all these arms shipments, that didn't happen. That's why it's inconceivable, because it's not real. It's not true. I thought that was just his wording is funny there.
Yeah, and I just had here at the end of the article, Will, that a senior Israeli official told the Strain that Netanyahu's video put on the Washington-Tel Aviv relationship could have been avoided. The official said Netanyahu made the decision against the opinion of the advisors and ministers whom he consulted, and the official added the remarks created a great outrage in the Biden administration. And it's not that he just consulted, say, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who reportedly the relationship isn't very good, or Benny Gantz, who just left the war cabinet because the relationship isn't very good, but one of Netanyahu's main advisors and confidants, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, who's one of the guys who really gets deployed to Washington to speak with Sullivan and Blinken about what Israel's doing, and really to soothe Washington whenever they have a concern over what Netanyahu's doing. He told Netanyahu not to do it, and Netanyahu still did it. And so it almost seems childish and funny, right? Well, that we have this leader of a foreign government and all of his buddies are telling him like, dude, don't post that. It's going to make everybody mad. Like, you shouldn't post that one, bro. And he posted it anyways. And it's created this whole mess. And now he's trying to add like he's making a personal sacrifice for the benefit of the state of Israel. And well, my guess would have been that this was meant to be for domestic Israeli consumption, but the initial video was posted in English. Now, the second message was posted in Hebrew. But I do think that maybe this has something to do with the debate next week, and he wants to create space for Trump to attack Biden, because in reality there really is no space for Trump to attack Biden on his Israel policy. Biden has given Netanyahu everything he wanted, but if Netanyahu's out there saying, I'm not getting what I want, then Trump's going to go up there and repeat that on the debate stage, and now we have a massive debate in the country about how much we should support Israel. The 99.99% that Biden supports them, or the 110% that Trump does, or the 125% that RFK Jr. does. It's absolutely insane. All right, well,
I was just going to say the administration has backed itself into such a corner with this too, because they've said so many times unconditional support for Israel and its right to, and now, this little bit of dispute is happening, and yeah, it's kind of creating a little bit of a rift, I guess.
All right, well, I think that's where we're going to wrap up the show for the week. Thank you so much for returning. Always a pleasure to have you when we could have you. And everybody, just keep an eye on antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute, the news section of both those websites. Me and Will be very active, again, along with our pals Connor Freeman and Jason Ditz over the next week. Connor Freeman will be returning to the show next week, everyone, so that co-host will be back. And, of course, I will have shows for you Monday through Friday. Thanks for tuning in. More shows next week.